Paul got here, the city. You guys know about people in the Bible, especially in the Gospels. There was a governor called Pontius Pilate, okay? Pontius Pilate, however you want to say it. He was what would have been a governor of this area, okay? Now, seemingly, because the only times we ever read of these people, like Herod, who was the Jewish king, although he was a king simply because he was appointed by Rome, so he wasn't even Jewish, but he was the Jewish king. It seems like these guys are always in Jerusalem, because whenever we read about them, they're in Jerusalem, like in the story of the crucifixion, stuff like that. Problem is, they're only there in Jerusalem during those times because it was a feast time, because there are millions of extra people in this city, and so the governor is there, the Jewish king is there. They don't spend much time here in Jerusalem at all. Their capital is in Caesarea. In Caesarea, if any of you remember, and I had pictures, and I've shown the pictures before, when I went to Israel, our very first stop, and if you go with me to Israel next year, this will be our very first stop, will be Caesarea, because it puts things into a historical perspective. And what you find there is a lot of Roman things from the first century. And what I saw when I was there, was an amphitheater. And in this amphitheater, where they would have had sporting events and stuff, they had seats that were reserved for people in those days. And it would have been a seat for a very important person. And there's large stones that served as a backrest, and it had their name inscribed on it. Like, this is your seat. And they found a few of those seats, and one of the markers that they found, which is in the museum in Jerusalem now, but I saw it, was a marker stone that said Pontius Pilatus, which is Latin. That was Pontius Pilate. That was his seat. So he's an actual person. He did exist. The Bible is real. It's talking about real people, okay? So here in Caesarea is also a theater. It's an outdoor theater, still there to this day. I stood there. This is exactly where Paul was, and I wish I could pull up the picture and show it to you. We didn't have time when I was getting things set up back there. I wish I could show you this picture, but I have been there. I've actually stood in the spot where Paul would have stood. He's on trial in front of the people. And so what has happened now is they've said, Paul, you can stay here as long as you want to until your accusers come, and we're going to have a trial. Now, his accusers are the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin. They've got to come up with some charges that are going to stick, because they can't just go to the Romans and say, we want you to lock this guy up because we don't like him. We don't like what he's saying. They got to come up with something that he's broken some rules. He's broken some laws here. So, in chapter 24, they arrive. That's where we are right now. Verse 1 of chapter 24. Book of Acts. Now, after 5 days, Ananias, the high priest, came down with the elders and a certain orator named Tertullus. We have read some of this. We've gotten into some of this. These gave evidence to the governor against Paul. And when he was called upon, Tertullus began his accusation, saying, seeing that through you we enjoy great peace and prosperity is being brought upon this nation by your foresight, we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. So they're talking to the governor. He's given this he's blowing smoke is what he's doing. He is setting up this wonderful greeting that he's giving to the governor. We accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness. Verse 4, nevertheless, not to be tedious to you any further, I beg you to hear by your courtesy a few words from us. We have found this man a plague, a creator of dissension among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, and we seized him and wanted to judge him according to our law. Now I'll stop right there, and let's look at what he's being accused of. He's being accused of someone who causes dissension wherever he goes. So in other words, wherever he goes, there's chaos, there's a riot. Now, if you read the book of Acts, you cannot help but notice that everywhere Paul went, they either had a great revival or a huge riot everywhere he went. But it was not Paul who started the dissensions. It was always some religious Pharisees in that town that caused the problems, including in Jerusalem. And when Paul went to Jerusalem at this feast time, when they're there, he wanted to go to the temple, and he tried to go to the temple, and they arrested him and simply saying, look, he's going to profane the temple. He never did. They're accusing him of stuff that, number one, he didn't do. The Pharisees had more to do with it than him, and they're accusing him of trying to profane the temple, which he never did in the first place. So it's charges that are false. Verse 7, but the commander Lysis came to him with great violence, took him out of our hands, commanding his accusers to come to you. By examining him yourself, you may ascertain all these things of which we accuse him. And the Jews also assented, maintaining that these things were so. So all the people they brought with them were saying, yes, this is all true. Verse 10, then Paul, after the governor had nodded to him to speak, answered, inasmuch as I know that you have been for many years a judge of this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself. Because you may ascertain that it is no more than 12 days since I went to Jerusalem to worship, and they neither found me in the temple disputing with anyone or inciting the crowd, either in the synagogues or in the city, nor can they prove the things of which they now accuse me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, so I worship the God of my fathers, believing all things which are written in the law and in the prophets. I have hope in God, which they themselves also accept, that there will be a resurrection of the dead, both of the just and the unjust. This being so, I myself always strive to have conscience without offense toward God and men. Now, after many years, I came to bring alms and offerings to my nation, in the midst of which some Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with a mob nor with tumult. They ought to have been here before you to object if they had anything against me. Or else let those who are here themselves say if they found any wrongdoings in me while I stood before the council. Unless it is for this one statement which I cried out, standing among them, concerning the resurrection of the dead, I am being judged by you this day. So Paul just gave his defense there, and he's saying, number one, they can't prove what they're saying. They can't prove that I was doing this, and Paul gave explanation for everything that he had done. He said, I've been in Jerusalem for 12 days. 12 days ago I got to Jerusalem, and I've been here for 5. That leaves me 7 days in Jerusalem that they claim I've done all this stuff, and yet they can't prove anything that they're saying I did. And I'm here, and they're accusing me, and I'm giving my defense, and I'm here to tell you what I said to them. And what he said to them was quite simply the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, here's the deal. What was happening then, going through the next 2,000 years until now, the question is, what is religion? What is religion, if we have to define it? Well, religion, by definition, does have a few requirements. Okay? There are a few requirements. Number one, religion, and this is not blood, by the way. My kids asked me what if I had blood. I don't. That's stain. That's some transparent stain right there. It's hard to get off. It's not blood, not bleeding. Where was I? Religion does have a few requirements. One of those requirements is that it has to be something that you compel others to believe. So you're teaching it, and you're compelling other people to believe it. Religion also has to promise a better life after this. You're going somewhere better. I'm talking about religion. I'm not talking about Bible, okay? Because they are different. And religion has to promise something better after this life. It has to have some core beliefs that you adhere to. Okay? Things like that. This is what makes a religion. So that being said, that's why we can say Islam is a religion, because it meets all those requirements, right? Judaism is a religion. It meets all those. Christianity, by definition, is a religion. Hinduism meets that as well. Scientology, if we want to get weird about it. Even if you want to get really weird about it, the Satanic Church in some respects. These all fit together in a category called religion. Okay? And as long as the God that you serve in religion is an ambiguous one, what do I mean by that? I mean he just has this name called God. Well, and as long as we're okay with that, these religions mix together very well. That's why worldwide we simply want to believe that the same God is the same God of Islam and Judaism and Christianity and Hinduism. We say these are all different definitions and avenues toward the same God. And that's for all the religions to live in harmony. That's the view that you have to have. So when does religion become a problem in society? When does religion become a problem that we now start to have arguments against it? When you give God a name that is not somebody else's God's name. Okay? So as long as we're just talking about G-O-D, God, we're cool. But as soon as we start referring to him as Jesus, now we got a problem. Because in this country, you can talk about God all you want. The problem comes when you start talking about Jesus. So they're upset not because of his religious actions, because this area of the world is an extremely religious area, even to this day. The problem they have is that he's not teaching religion or God, he's teaching Jesus. And to this very day, I don't care if you go to a public school, I don't care if you go to a football game, I don't care if you go to a workplace, wherever you work, most of the time, the problem is not when you're talking about God, it's when you're talking about Jesus is when you have a problem. Why is that? Because now it's no longer a religion. Because Jesus did not bring religion. He did not come here to bring a new religion. He didn't start a religion called Christianity. He didn't start a church called the Christian Church. He came and set up a kingdom here on this planet that he rules and reigns, and that he is ultimately coming to this planet to rule and reign on the planet. Okay? And it is not a religion, it is a kingdom. And Paul is telling them, look, guys, this is no longer about fulfilling the needs of some traditional requirement called a religion. This is now about living in a kingdom and being ruled by a king named Jesus. That's why he's in the trouble that he's in. Because in Rome, you can talk about God all you want. In Rome, they had at least 100 gods everywhere you turned. If you go look up Roman mythology, Greek mythology. Look at all the stuff. They have a God for everything. There is what we call in theology and in history something that we call the God gap. And this is why you have so many gods in these types of societies. We call it not the God gap, the gap God, the gap God. And where that comes from is, see, back going through history, you come to the point where there were things people didn't understand. We understood a lot of things, but there were a few things that there were gaps. We understood that it rained in some seasons, it snowed, in other seasons it got cold. We understood all that, but when somebody said, well, why does it rain in April? Or where does the rain come from? That would be a gap. We don't know. We don't have the answer to that. That leaves kind of a gap in our understanding. And anywhere there's a gap, put a God there. Well, there's the God of the rain, and he only comes around in April. So his name is well, back in the time of the Philistines, the god of rain was Baal. They didn't understand where rain come from. There's a gap in their knowledge. They said, well, we'll put a god there. His name's Baal. And he only sends rain when you're real good. And when you've given lots of money to the Baal church, then he'll send rain. And so we have, those are called gap gods. And that's why there's a god of the moon, there's a god of the stars, there's a god of all these things in mythology, because these are all things nobody understood, and the stuff they didn't understand, they'd simply put a god there. They did it in Egypt, they did it in Persia, they did it all throughout history. And so eventually you get to the point where there's gods everywhere you look. And that was Rome. Well, it was Greece, but then Rome took over, and now they got all these gods. But what Paul is saying is, look, guys, this is no longer about that. It is about the one true God and the Messiah, his son, Jesus Christ. And the problem is, he's preaching the truth of Scripture, and that is, there is a Messiah called Jesus Christ, and he is the only way. I mean, you see how mad people get when that's said on Oprah. God forbid an audience member at Oprah says Jesus Christ is the only way. She comes unglued, and everybody's... Anybody ever seen that before? There's been clear... she can bring all the people on there. I'll never understand the Oprah Winfrey Show. I will never understand it. I'm not here to criticize. Got nothing against the lady, although she is a bit of a fruitcake. I have never understood this show. She will bring people on there that are devout Christian believers. She'll bring on Tyler Perry. She will bring on T.D. Jakes and all these people as guests and do special episodes where she went to T.D. Jakes' church and all this kind of stuff. But then when they start talking any kind of religion on her show and somebody mentions Jesus and says Jesus is the only way, she berates that person. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't get it, because people don't like that. Don't tell me there's only one way. Don't tell me that there's a way and my way won't work. Don't tell me that. See, that's in our nature. I have a way of doing something. You ever run into somebody that you can't do things the way you're trying to do it? There's got to be another way. And you got to do it this way. Why? Because this is my way. But you're not doing it. I'm doing it. So I'm going to do it. Leave me alone. But we don't like being. No. You're going to do it. You're going to do it this way. This is my philosophy. It's my philosophy anywhere. And God help anybody who's got to live with me, because this is just the philosophy I live by. I am happy to do what needs done. And I'm happy to do what you need done. But if you want it done any other way than the way I'm going to do it, you do it. Okay? If you want it done, but you want it has to be this way, fine. God bless you. Have at it. But if you want me to do it, here's how I'm going to do it. Because don't tell me that my way won't work and that it has to be this way. Don't do that. Okay? Even if your way is better, don't tell me, okay? Because this is, I don't need somebody to tell me that I need to do it this way, So that being said, when people come and they say, Jesus Christ is the only way, it sounds like we're just being picky and we're saying, no, your way won't work. It has to be my way. And it sounds like that. And that's why people say, oh, no, well, we can't say that. We can't say Jesus is the only way. Well, here's the problem. We miss the point, because the point is there is a righteous requirement of the law, and the righteous requirement of the law is completely and totally spelled out by God himself, and the only one who has ever fulfilled that law is Jesus. So, he literally is the only way. Because this law won't work. You can't come through the law. You have to come through the one who fulfilled the law. There's only one. Period. It's not because it's my preference. It's not because it's more popular. It's not because it fits better historically with society. It's none of those things. It's simply because it is the truth. He is the only way, because he is the only one. Period. Nobody else did what he did. Nobody else fulfilled what he did. That's it, period. So that's what Paul is preaching and teaching, and it's got him in trouble. We are now in verse 22. But when Felix heard these things, having more accurate knowledge of the way, he adjourned the proceedings and said, when Lysias, the commander, comes down, I will make a decision on your case. So he commanded the centurion to keep Paul and to let him have liberty, and hold him not to forbid any of his friends to provide for or visit him. And after some days, when Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish, he sent for Paul and heard him concerning the faith in Christ. Now as he reasoned about the righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and answered, go away for now. When I have a convenient time, I'll call for you. Meanwhile, he also hoped that money would be given to him, and we went through all this last time. He's hoping for a bribe that might release him. Therefore, he sent for him more often and conversed with him. But after 2 years, Porcius Festus succeeded Felix, and Felix, wanting to do the Jews a favor, left Paul bound. So how long is Paul in Caesarea waiting on this judge? 2 years. As a matter of fact, so long that Felix, the governor, his term is over. And they've got a new governor named Festus. So we go from Felix to Festus. Now we're in chapter 25. Now when Festus had come to the province, after 3 days he went up from Caesarea to Jerusalem, and then the high priest and the chief men of the Jews informed him against Paul, and they petitioned him, asking a favor against him that he would summon him to Jerusalem while they lay in ambush along the road to kill him. But Festus answered that Paul should be kept at Caesarea, and that he himself was going there shortly. Therefore he said, let those who have authority among you go down with me and accuse this man and see if there's any fault in him. So Paul now has to have another trial. Verse 6, and when they had remained among them more than 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day, sitting on the judgment seat, he commanded Paul to be brought. And when he had come, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood about and laid many serious complaints against Paul, which they could not prove. And he answered for himself, neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I offended in anything at all. But Festus, wanting to do the Jews a favor, answered Paul and said, are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and there be judged before me concerning these things? So Paul said, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you very well know. For if I am an offender or have committed anything deserving of death, I do not object to dying. But if there is nothing in these things of which these men accuse me, no one can deliver me to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, you have appealed to Caesar? To Caesar you shall go. Where's Caesar? Anybody know your history? What was Caesar? He was a ruler of the Roman Empire. Where's Caesar? Huh? He'd be in Rome. Not in Israel, not in Jerusalem, not in Caesarea. So Paul says, I'm appealing my case. You ain't sending me back to Jerusalem to some kangaroo court down there where these fools are going to come up with their own lies and do their own thing. Now, I've seen this before. That's what they did to Jesus. Jesus was tried down there to kangaroo court, found guilty of charges that couldn't be proven, and they killed him. Okay? Now, Paul knows, I ain't the Son of God. I ain't going to be rising again in 3 days. I ain't going down there for them to kill me. Okay? So I don't understand with some people, and this is a joke, lighten up, so if it offends you, I don't care. That's why some people say, you know, if you're a preacher and you're preaching the gospel, you ought to preach like Jesus. So I don't know, it got him killed. You know, I'm trying to, you know, keep going here. So it did, it got him killed. But like Paul knew, I'm no Messiah. I will not be rising again in 3 days if they kill me. So no, do not take me to Jerusalem. I appeal my case to Caesar. And so they said, fine, you appeal to Caesar, then you'll go to Caesar. So now Paul's going to Rome. And after some days, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to greet Festus. And when they were there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a certain man left a prisoner of Felix, about whom the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me when I was in Jerusalem, asking for a judgment against him. To them I answered, it is not the custom of the Romans to deliver any man to destruction before the accused meets the accusers face to face and has the opportunity to answer for himself concerning the charge against him. Therefore, when they had came together, without any delay, the next day I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought in. When the accusers stood up, they brought no accusation against him of such things as I supposed, but had some questions against him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. And because I was uncertain of such questions, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged concerning these matters. But when Paul appealed to be reserved for the decision of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would also like to hear the man myself. Well, good Lord, how many people does Paul have to plead his case in front of? I mean, seriously, this is ridiculous at this point. He's already pled his case before the Jews. They had to bring him up to Caesarea to save his life. He had to plead his case there before Felix. Felix delayed it for 2 years. Now he's had to do it before Festus. Festus says, well, fine, I'll send you to Caesar. But before that happens, we got King Agrippa who's here. And King Agrippa says, well, you know what? I think I'd like to hear the case. You know, good Lord, man. How many people does Paul have to give his case to? But here's the deal. Every time that Paul pleads his case, it's kind of like there is no such thing as bad publicity, okay? As bad as something gets, you know, as terribly bad as something gets, the bigger deal people make of it, you're just giving more publicity, right? If you guys remember back in 2006, there's a movie about to come out. There's a book that was written in 2002. In 2006, they're going to make this movie. And not a lot of people had read the book. I mean, some had. I mean, a good deal had, but certainly nowhere near what was about to happen. Because this book was, and by the way, it was a fictional book. It never claimed to be anything more than a fictional book. The writer is he's actually a really good writer. I've read some of his books. He's really, really good. His name's Dan Brown, and he wrote a little book called Da Vinci Code, okay, the Da Vinci Code. The Catholic Church mainly, but the church in general, was up in arms over this book because of what the claims and the mystery and the thriller of this novel claimed to be persuading people that it was factual that Jesus was married to Mary of Mary Magdalene, okay? And which, by the way, the premise behind the whole book was from a certainly non-factual. It's the Priory of Zion, which ended up being a hoax. It was exposed way back in the 60s, but they overlooked that and they pretend that didn't happen. And that the book is, that's why the book is nonsense. It's based on nonsense, but it's actually a really well-written thriller novel. It's just what it is. It's a book. And then they made a movie into it, you know, which wasn't that good. But then, you know, people hadn't read this book and they hadn't had any intentions of seeing the movie. But then the church made such a huge stink about it that the guy sold another 200 million copies of his book. And the movie became like, I mean, you had to wait. It was like Star Wars in '77. You had to wait in line to see this movie. And if if you hadn't made that big of a stink about it, that probably wouldn't have happened. You know, to me, that's a classic prime example of, you know, God can use, sometimes when bad things are happening and you can't control what's going on and what's being said, God is saying, don't worry, man, I got this because I can take this and turn it around. So Paul is saying, why do I have to keep giving my story here? Why do I have to keep giving my testimony? Unbeknownst, perhaps, to Paul, every time he does this, more and more people are probably coming and hearing them, and they're hearing this story, this testimony of his life. He has to keep telling the story over and over again about how he used to be this, you know, despicable person in Jerusalem who was a Pharisee that was killing Christians, and now God converted him through the Messiah, Jesus Christ. He tells all the things that he's seen on his missionary journeys. He's basically giving that testimony over and over and over again. That's why God won't let him go yet. He won't let him out of Caesarea, and he keeps sending people back. And by the way, it's these influential Roman Gentiles, most of them pagans, that are coming, and they keep saying, you know what, I think I want to hear this story. And he has to keep telling it. So, yeah, I'm sure it's very aggravating. But, you know, hey, I think I want to hear the charges against him too. So, where are we here? Oh. Then Agrippa said to Festus, 22, I would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. Verse 23. So the next day, when Agrippa and Bernice had come with a great pomp, big parade, they entered into auditorium with the commanders and the prominent men of the city. At Festus' command, Paul was brought in. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all the men who are here present with us, you see this man whom the whole assembly of the Jews petitioned me, both at Jerusalem and here, crying out that he was not fit to live any longer. But when I found that he had committed nothing deserving of death, that he himself had appealed to Augustus, I decided to send him. I have nothing certain to write to my Lord concerning him. Therefore I have brought him out before you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, that you may, after the examination has taken place, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner and not to specify the charges against him. So he's going out, and basically they're saying, we don't even know what to charge him with. We're sending him to Caesar. We don't even have anything to charge him with. Verse 1 of chapter 26. Let's keep going. Then Agrippa said to Paul, you are permitted to speak for yourself. So Paul stretched out his hand and answered for himself, I think myself happy, King Agrippa, because today I shall answer for myself before you concerning all the things of which I am accused by the Jews, especially because you are expert in all customs and questions which have to do with the Jews. Therefore I beg you that you hear me patiently. My manner of life from my youth, which was spent from the beginning amongst my own nation at Jerusalem, all the Jews know. They know me from the first, if they are willing to testify, that according to our strictest sect of our religion, I lived a Pharisee. Saying, I used to be one of them. Verse 6, and now I stand, and I am judged for the hope of the promise made by God to our fathers. To this promise, our 12 tribes, earnestly serving God night and day, hope to attain. For this hope's sake, King Agrippa, I am accused by the Jews. Why should it be thought incredible by you that God raises the dead? Indeed, I myself thought I must do many things contrary to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. This I also did in Jerusalem, and many of the saints I shut up in prison, and having received authority from the chief priests, and when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. And I punished them often in every synagogue, and compelled them to blaspheme. And being exceedingly enraged against them, I persecuted them, even to foreign cities. While this occupied, I journeyed to Damascus with authority and commission from the chief priests. At midday, O king, along the road I saw a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining around me, and those who journeyed with me. And when we had fallen to the ground, I heard a voice speaking to me, saying in the Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. So I said, Who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and stand on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to make you a minister and a witness, both of the things which you have seen and of the things which will yet reveal to you. I will deliver you from the Jewish people, as well as from the Gentiles, to whom I now send you, to open their eyes, in order to turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance amongst those who are sanctified by faith in me. Therefore, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision, but declared first to those in Damascus and in Jerusalem and through all the region of Judea, and then to the Gentiles, that they should repent, turn to God, and do works befitting repentance. For those reasons, the Jews seized me in the temple and tried to kill me. Therefore, having obtained help from God, to this day I stand witnessing both to small and great, saying no other things than those which the prophets and Moses would come, that the Christ would suffer, that he would be the first to rise from the dead, and would proclaim light to the Jewish people and to the Gentiles. Now, as he thus made his defense, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, you are beside yourself. Much learning is driving you mad. See, Paul, you're crazy. But he said, I am not mad, most noble Festus, but speak the words of truth and reason. For the king, now, which by the way, why would Festus do that? Why would Festus jump up and be like, Paul, you're talking crazy? He's doing that because he's embarrassed. He's brought in King Agrippa to hear this. And he's talking about people raising from the dead. So that's the only reason he's jumping up. Paul, you're crazy. He's embarrassed. It's like when you have a guest and your kids act up in front of the guest. When the guest isn't there, they can run around in their underwear and do whatever they want, bounce off the walls. But you've got a guest here, And so when the kids act up, hey, what are you, crazy? So that's what Festus was doing there, by the way. It's just he's not they don't really think Paul is crazy. As a matter of fact, they really just want to get rid of him. Let's see. So we were at 26. For the king, before whom I also speak freely, knows these things, for I am convinced that none of these things escapes his attention, since this thing was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you do believe. Then Agrippa said to Paul, you almost persuade me to become a Christian. Now stop right there. You almost persuade me to become a Christian. Very famous words from the book of Acts. Paul's talking about what Jesus did. And then he mentions what the prophets and Moses and what they all prophesied of. Jesus did what the prophets prophesied of. He said all that, and then he looks at King Agrippa. King Agrippa, who is a Jew, and says, well, King, you do believe in the prophets, right? See the spot he's put the king in? Okay? You do believe in the prophets. Because if he says, yes, I do believe in the prophets, then he's going to have to say, well, if you believe in the prophets, you do know that this is what the prophets said, and Jesus did what the prophets said. His only other option is that King Agrippa is going to have to say, no, I don't believe in the prophets, and he certainly ain't going to do that. So King Agrippa is in kind of a tight spot. And so King Agrippa is trying to come up with an answer. And the answer he comes up with is, Paul, came that close, man. You almost persuade me to become a Christian. The question is, what is he really saying there? because it kind of sounds like a compliment. Like, man, Paul, that was good. That was good, man. You almost got me. You're good. Kind of sounds like a compliment. You almost persuade me to become a Christian. But you've got to understand the term Christian. You and I, we are, here in this church, we are Christians, right? And that's fine. And that's our terminology nowadays, because nowadays to be a Christian means to be Christ-like and be in this denomination that believes the teachings of Jesus Christ. We are Christian. And that's what the word has evolved into, and that's fine. But you'll never find in the Bible where Jesus called his followers Christians, ever. You'll never find where God called any of his followers Christians. In fact, nobody in the book of Acts is called Christians by anyone other than a people at Antioch, a church at Antioch, not a church. The citizens of the city of Antioch see this church rise up, and people are serving a God that is not one of the Roman gods, not one of these false deity gods, but is a God that they cannot see. And they're worshiping this God, and they see signs and wonders, and they don't know what to call these people. And the only thing they know is that they are followers of Jesus, who they call the Christ. Christ meaning the anointed one, the Messiah. And so they call the people little Christs. That's what they do. We don't know what to call them. We'll call them little Christs. And that's what the word Christians comes from. That's the only time in the Bible that the word Christians with an S is ever used. 2 other times in the Bible the word Christian, singular, is used. One is used in the book of 1 Peter, I believe, perhaps 2 Peter, where Peter is talking to them and saying, you will be persecuted this way. You'll be persecuted as a heretic. You'll be persecuted as this. And then he says, but if they persecute you as a Christian, what he simply means there is, because in all these other places he's saying, if they call you a heretic, if they call you, this or that, he said, but if they call you a Christian, well, how is it calling me a Christian fits in the same list as calling me a heretic and a witch and all this other stuff? Because being called a Christian was actually an insult. So Peter said, if they call you a Christian, just keep going. Don't worry about it. Because it was actually an insult to be called a Christian. You're being called a little Christ. Okay? And then the other time is right here. King Agrippa says, you almost convinced me to become a little Christ. You almost convinced me to call to be one of them people, that I see. So it's kind of a mystery there. Was Agrippa complimenting him, or was he being kind of facetious? I don't know. But that was Agrippa's answer. You almost persuade me to become a Christian. Verse 29, then Paul said, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me today might become both almost and altogether such as I am, except for with these chains. So Paul said, well, I wish everybody become a Christian. He didn't say that. You almost persuade me. No, I would to God that everybody here would become like me. Obviously, minus the chains. That's what Paul says. Because he's saying, look, it ain't about do you fit into the category of this title that people have given. It's about, are you enlightened? Do you have knowledge of Jesus Christ? And that's what Paul's saying. Look, that's what I wish all of you here were. Verse 30, when he said these things, the king stood up, as well as the governor and Bernice and those who sat with them. And when they had gone aside, they talked amongst themselves, saying, this man is doing nothing deserving of death or chains. Then Agrippa said to Festus, this man might have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. Really? Well, we'd set him free, but he's appealed to Caesar, so send him to Rome. Do you see how crazy this is? He's been passed along for 2 years, and now somebody else is going to hear him. They're going to say, I've appealed to Caesar. Okay, but come here. King Agrippa now wants to hear, and all back and forth. And hey, I think you ought to be set free. Too bad he appealed to Caesar. Yeah. This is Paul's life. This is how Paul's life is going now, and this is how it's going to go. He's going to Rome. Eventually he's going to die in Rome. He's going to be beheaded in Rome. Eventually, not yet, and not in the book of Acts. But he's having a rough time. But God is putting him right where he needs to be, because now Paul's going to go to Rome. And Paul's going to have an audience there. And I mean, this is the path that God has for him. And so it's crazy. It's a crazy story. So that's it. I'm actually 2 minutes early tonight. So that's it. That's all I have. Anybody have any questions? We got time for some questions, burning questions.